Hey Definers, quick note that this episode is sponsored by the Zayed Sustainability Prize. The Zayed Sustainability Prize is the UAE's pioneering global award in sustainability. It recognizes and rewards organizations and high schools who are driving impactful, innovative, and inspiring sustainability solutions across 5 distinct categories: health, food, energy, water, and global high schools. For more information, go to zayedsustainabilityprize.com.
All right, Definers, welcome to episode 71 of the Sustainability Defined podcast. We're getting up there, Jay.
71. Scott, what happens at 75?
I don't know. We're still going to be here defining sustainability, one concept and one bad joke at a time. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Well played.
So, Jay, give us the outline for this episode.
Okay, we're going to ask, why is water important to agriculture? How much water is used in agriculture, and what types of agriculture require the most water? Where in the world is the most water used for agriculture? And what are the most water-stressed agricultural areas? Then we'll ask, what are innovations and approaches that can help reduce water used and needed in agriculture? And then finally, we will segue into our guest conversation with Ashwin Madgavkar, the founder of Ceres Imaging. Okay. That's a good-looking lineup, Scott, but start us off. Why is water important to agriculture?
All right, well, put simply, water is a critical input for essentially all agricultural production. You want food? And I know you do, Jay.
You do.
You need water. We'll get into later the embedded water footprint of different types of food. Some people might be sad about some of their favorite foods having a high water footprint. So there's your warning. Farmers get water they need in different ways. So they can get it from rain, groundwater, surface water, and also irrigation. Now, irrigation, that last one, that's key for food production. Just 20% of total available agricultural land is irrigated, but that land accounts for 40% of food production. All right, so let's get into our next section now. How much water is used in agriculture, and what types of agriculture require the most water? Well, let's keep on this irrigation theme. Irrigated agriculture is the largest user of water globally. Currently, agriculture accounts, on average, for 70% of all freshwater withdrawals globally. So agriculture is the majority of freshwater withdrawals. And how much water is that 70% of freshwater withdrawal globally put toward agriculture? Well, each year, that's over 2 quadrillion gallons of water. Jake, I didn't even heard of quadrillion before this.
It's kind of like that little fact people like to throw out, oh, well, because numbers are infinite, you can make up any name for a number and technically it exists. But quadrillion to me kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it's made up enough sounding that it's impressive. And that's actually enough water to cover the entire United States in 2 feet of water. That's crazy. You could have a kiddie pool in the whole United States.
Yeah, I mean, that's enough to blow up your raft and scoot around.
So sadly, a good chunk of that water goes into the environment rather than actually helping the targeted plants grow. So it's not necessary.
Right, and to that point, World Wildlife Fund says around 60% of the water used in agriculture is wasted due to leaky irrigation systems, evaporation, inefficient application methods, as well as the cultivation of crops that are too thirsty for the environment in which they're grown. For more on issues with leaky water infrastructure, check out episode 21 on water infrastructure.
All right. So importantly, while agriculture depends on water, it's also a major source of water pollution. Agricultural fertilizer runoff, pesticide use, and livestock effluents all contribute to the pollution of waterways and groundwater. Now, demand for water in agriculture and for many other uses is expected to increase considerably as our global population goes from just over 8 billion today to over 10 billion by 2050. So you're going to hear a lot of stats and facts about, oh my gosh, so much water usage. It could get worse as our population grows, okay? So combined with the increased consumption of calories and more complex food, which accompanies income growth in the developing world, it's estimated that agricultural production will need to expand by approximately 70% by 2050.
No small task. Okay, let's talk about the water necessary for certain types of food. So folks, brace yourselves. We wanted to get this info all from one source, so it's more apples to apples numbers. Elbow nudge there, Scott.
Nice.
We found watercalculator.org to be a good source. So, the water footprints we note here are all based on 1 4-ounce serving. Okay. Livestock like cows and pigs are a big one. Beef takes 463 gallons. That's equivalent to 1,752 liters per serving. Pork and bacon is 180 gallons or 681 liters per serving. Then chicken and turkey are both 130 gallons or 492 liters per serving.
I'm glad we're giving the liters too, Jay, for our non-U.S. listeners.
That's right.
Everyone can understand.
Yes, we're speaking, at least trying to speak universal languages here, Scott. Okay, a big part of the footprint for these animals is not actually giving water directly to the animals, but rather the water used to grow the crops to feed the animals. In the United States, 1/3 of all consumed water goes to irrigate crops not for human consumption, but those used to feed beef and dairy cattle. In the Colorado River Basin, it's over 50%. We'll talk more about the Colorado River Basin later on in this intro.
And then there's making non-animal products and growing produce. They have a water footprint too, in some cases more than the animals you were just talking about. For example, chocolate is listed on the water calculator as the worst. Sorry to say it. 516 gallons or 1,953 liters per serving.
And it's I got to jump in, right?
Yeah.
Like it's crazy. Yeah. I feel like most folks know, so beef takes a lot of water to produce. But I mean,
right.
Before we put this intro together, I had no clue that chocolate was even worse than beef.
I certainly didn't know it was worse than beef. I knew it had a pretty darn large water footprint. But I hope, Jay, we can do sustainable chocolate at some point.
Calling all sponsors that want to send us sustainable chocolate bars.
It'd be a tasty episode.
Oh.
All right, moving along. Sorry, everybody. It had to be done. So second is almonds at 483 gallons or 1,828 liters per serving. And then for context, third on the list after chocolate and almonds was then beef. So some other notables, cashews, 427 gallons or 1,616 liters per serving. So you heard almonds was 2, cashews is up here. Lots of nuts at the top of this list.
It's nuts, Scott.
Yeah, it's nuts. Quinoa is 135 gallons or 511 liters per serving. Tofu is 76 gallons, 287 liters per serving. So it's less, but it's still got a water footprint. Wheat flour is 55 gallons or 208 liters per serving. And then on the watercalculator.org website, there was a 4-way tie for the most water-efficient food. And Jay, you rightly said, let's add this. People will find this interesting. This is 6 gallons or 22 liters per serving. The 4-way tie, carrots, celery, tomatoes, everyone's favorite, turnips.
Turns out Bugs Bunny was right all along, Scott.
I don't know if I've ever had turnips.
Yeah, I feel like they might have snuck into a salad I've had at some point, but I would otherwise agree with you.
I would need to roast them.
Yeah. Okay, to conclude, let's zoom out and talk about water generally to make food to feed a person. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that between 528 and 1,321 gallons, that's between 2,000 and 5,000 liters, of water are needed to produce a person's daily food. Just daily. That's a crazy stat.
Yeah.
Okay. Next section, Scott. Where in the world is the most water used for agriculture? And what are the most water-stressed agricultural areas?
So we found an Our World in Data page last updated in 2018, and with some good information from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization's Aquastat database that has by country the agricultural water use withdrawals and the percentage of freshwater withdrawals used for agriculture. Now, I didn't know this, Jay, that India was this large of a farming population and using this much water, but they were by far the world's largest agricultural water consumer at nearly 700 billion cubic meters per year. China was second at like almost half, like at approximately 385 billion cubic meters.
Now, let's talk percentage of freshwater withdrawals used for agriculture. The average agricultural water use for low-income countries is 90%. That's 79% for middle-income countries and only 41% at high-income countries. There are a number of countries across South Asia, Africa, and Latin America that use more than 90% of water withdrawals for agriculture. The highest in 2019, according to the UN FAQ Aquastat data, was Somalia at 99.5%. More on the dire state of affairs in Somalia here in a minute. Countries in the global north, by comparison, tend to use a much lower share of water for agriculture. For example, Germany and the Netherlands use less than 1%.
I'm glad we did this percentage thing, Jay. I mean, it's really telling that these developing countries are using such a large percentage of their water use for agriculture. It just hadn't occurred to me, this dimension.
Right, and to your point, Scott, expressing them as percentages makes it clear how far to the extremes these countries are.
Totally. All right. And we've talked about how this can get worse as the population's growing, but also because climate change is projected to increase the fluctuations in precipitation and surface water supplies, reduce snowpacks and glaciers, and affect the water requirements of certain crops. Droughts and extreme weather events are expected to become more frequent as well. An OECD assessment of future water risk hotspots projects that without further action, Northeast China, Northwest India, and the Southwest United States will be among the most severely affected regions, with domestic and global repercussions.
All right, let's zoom in on a couple different countries. We mentioned Somalia just a minute ago, and like all of East Africa, it continues to face a severe drought. With Somalia on track for a fifth failed rainy season, there have been no crops in the fields for more than 2 years.
Hey.
During these repeated droughts, people who can no longer live off the land often end up on the outskirts of Baidoa, capital of Somalia's southwest state. By July 2022, there were 498 verified camps for the displaced, with dozens more informal settlements. The World Health Organization says every single person in Somalia is facing hunger on a scale not seen since the famine in 2011, which killed more than 250,000 people, half of them children.
And it's so sad, Jay, because these people were living off the land, at least supporting themselves, and through no fault of their own, they can't.
Right. It's hard to wrap your mind around. So for those wanting to help in this situation, there are charities on the ground. One fund is the Somalia Humanitarian Fund. It's one of the UN's country-based pooled funds. Contributions are collected into a single, unearmarked fund and managed locally under UN leadership. Now, our podcast is going to try another matching donation challenge for our definers of up to $250. If you'd like to donate, go to crisisrelief.un.org/Somalia and then email your receipt to hosts, HOSTS, at sustainabilitydefined.com to get the match. Now, while we're talking donation matches, friendly reminder of our other charitable match for our listeners for the Uproot Project, which supports journalists of color covering the environment. We announced this in our 2022 Holiday Hodgepodge episode. Same deal. Go to uprootproject.org, send us your receipt, hosts at sustainabilitydefined.com, and we'll match it if we have not hit our max.
Yeah, Jay, we released the Hodgepodge, 5 days ago? We haven't gotten anyone to email receipts. I hope people take advantage of this. We'd love to see it. All right, so now we're going to go from Somalia to India and talk about its 600 million farmers. Extreme weather events like heat waves and unseasonal rains occurred on 88% of the days in the first 9 months of 2022, affecting 1.8 million hectares of India's crop area. Because over 50% of India's net cultivated area is rain-fed and accounts for nearly 40% of the total food production, this crisis of not getting the rain also impacts consumers and India's economy. Unfortunately, these sort of extreme weather events are going to become more common as climate change worsens. Groundwater is also important to Indian farmers, and that's being depleted. Many of India's farmers primarily irrigate their crops with wells that draw water from within the ground. The result is that a third of the country's aquifers are being pumped much faster than they can replenish. So they're not getting rain, and the water that's in the ground, it's being depleted. There have been frequent protests by farmers And sadly, one recent estimate says nearly 30 Indian farmers commit suicide each day, typically due to overwhelming debt and other stressors. Even if that's half, if it's 15 Indian farmers a day committing suicide, I mean, that's another one that's just hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, this is a tough little section here.
Yeah.
Okay, last, let's look at the United States, particularly the Colorado River, which is at historically low levels due to the ongoing 20-year mega drought in the southwestern U.S. The reservoirs Lake Mead and Lake Powell are at record lows. Federal officials are demanding historic cuts in water use next year. And this means some farms won't be able to operate at all or won't water some of their fields. Consider the hundreds of farms in Imperial County on the southern tip of California. These farms draw more water from the Colorado River than all of Arizona and Nevada combined. So, how to solve this? One draft plan has farmers being paid to use less water. About $1,500 per acre, almost $1.4 billion in total, in exchange for cutting water use by roughly 20% on almost 1 million acres of farmland. Now, this is an ongoing crisis. The reality is the Colorado River doesn't have the water to support all the farms that generate billions of dollars in revenue and the crops relied on in the United States and the world. Just really hard pills to swallow, definers. We're throwing them at you left and right.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked about Somalia, India, southwestern U.S. Let's tie these up a little bit. So in some cases, it's entities from abroad that own the farms. Here in the U.S., after Saudi Arabia finalized a ban on growing thirsty crops like alfalfa and hay to feed livestock and cattle because the Middle East is running out of water, Saudi companies bought farms in Arizona to grow crops for their cattle. There are laws in Arizona against exporting water, but not against exporting goods that consume a lot of water. So in our next section, we'll see why the water policies in Arizona made this an attractive investment even with the lack of water in the state. So kind of crazy section there, Jay. Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel like people often talk about what's the first big war we're going to have over water, right? And that people's lives are going to be taken. But there's already lives being lost, unfortunately, as we just went over, because of water stress. All right, so let's dig ourselves out of this. So this is our last section. What are innovations and approaches that can help reduce water used and needed in agriculture? We're going to talk about policy, infrastructure, technology, and farming techniques as we dive into the future and some solutions.
Okay, let's start with policy. One policy approach to rein in inefficient water use in agriculture could be simply putting a price on water. Water often remains hidden in the economic valuation of agricultural assets, since oftentimes farmers do not pay for the costs associated with withdrawal and delivery. Water markets and water trading can be found in Australia, the US, Mexico, Chile, China, Spain, and South Africa. However, these are more exceptions than the rule because in most of the world, there are no tradable water rights. Rather, water is either tied to land's property rights or treated as a public good, quote, res nullius, i.e., an open access resource. How's that for Latin, Scott?
Did you take Latin, Jay? Do you know anyone who has taken Latin? I'm trying to think.
I never did. I remember knowing friends in middle school that did. And I was like, maybe that's useful because obviously Latin forms the basis for all these Romance languages. But,
sure,
beyond that.
Maybe if you had any friends in the spelling bee.
Yes, which, of course, I know is one of our favorite events to watch each year.
Oh, my God. Yes. And, of course, Jed Bartlett from The West Wing speaks Latin because it's President Bartlett. All right, so another policy approach is limiting how much can be extracted from the surface water and groundwater so that we can track water use and not use more than local resources can provide. Consider Arizona and groundwater, which we've been talking about a bit. In the 80% of that state, outside of its so-called active management areas, there's no restrictions on how much groundwater can be pumped and no way to monitor it. Pretty nuts. Ugh. It's a Wild West out there.
Yeah, it's a bad recipe right there. Okay, that was policy. Let's transition now to infrastructure. One infrastructure improvement that will conserve water in agriculture is making sure the water isn't lost as it's being transported to the farm. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or the USDA, off-farm sources account for 40% of total water applied to U.S. irrigated cropland. USDA says irrigation water delivery organizations in 2019 released nearly 22 trillion gallons of water. About 16% of that water was lost to evaporation or seepage during storage or transport. Lining water canals with quasi-impermeable materials, such as concrete or plastic membranes, can reduce conveyance losses as less water is lost to seepage. However, a large proportion, about 72%, of the main and lateral canals owned by irrigation organizations remain unlined, mainly because of cost, or they believe the lost water will recharge aquifers or be minimal due to soils and geology.
I feel like this is not a sexy solution, Jay, right? Like, oh, just line
Right.
the pipes better. But man, I mean, seems pretty straightforward. Like, duh. And maybe even just requirements like if you're going to build such a thing, you got to align it.
Right.
You know, maybe that exists, but we didn't see that. All right, another infrastructure piece here. Let's talk about rainwater harvesting. So rainwater harvesting is the accumulation and storage of rainwater runoff for reuse before it reaches the aquifer. The water could be collected via a variety of means, from dwelling houses and farm sheds, road surfaces, concrete surfaces, and plastic surfaces, including greenhouse coverings. It can help reduce dependence on and depletion of groundwater. In the U.S., you can't legally harvest as much rainwater as you want in all the states. Some states, particularly in the West, like Colorado, Jay, have restrictions, so don't be rainwater harvesting to your heart's content, okay? But no state's outlawed, according to a 2020 review of the topic we're going to link to on our site. In fact, some states like Rhode Island, Texas, and Virginia encourage residents to collect rainwater by offering a tax credit or exemption for equipment purchased for rainwater harvesting.
Okay, we've talked policy, we've talked infrastructure. Now let's chat technology. 85% of all irrigation is still done by releasing vast quantities of water across the surface of a field, which is pretty much the same way it was handled, about 4,000 years ago in a place called Mesopotamia.
85% of all irrigation.
Crazy.
Still done.
Crazy. With this flood irrigation, as much as 70% of the water is unnecessary, and overwatered crops can fail to reach their full potential. Today, there are hundreds of drip irrigation companies, but the technology is being applied to less than 5% of irrigated acres globally. Why such a small percentage? Well, it's largely due to cost. For one, it takes energy to pump the water through hundreds of feet of pipe. Also, the dripper lines can get clogged with the silt found in natural water, so it must be filtered, adding another expense. The whole setup amounts to at least $2,000 an acre plus energy bills. For lower value crops such as cotton or alfalfa, drip irrigation simply doesn't pay.
Some good news, Jay, though. We did read about some innovative new companies looking to dramatically lower that cost. One is the Israeli startup Ndrip, which has an installation cost of $400 an acre. That compares, Jay, to what you just said, about $2,000 an acre. So pretty good drop. A lot of the cost savings come from using gravity to provide the required pressure to force the water through the pipes. Ndrip has raised $25 million in funding, and its system is being used by hundreds of farmers for 4,000 acres worth of crops, ranging from cotton to potatoes to soybeans. But of course, there's a long way to go to going from that 4,000 acres to Earth's 600 million flood irrigated acres. But you got to start somewhere, Jay.
That's right. Okay, but even with drip irrigation, a farmer may be watering too much or too little. New technology has come online to help farmers with, quote, irrigation scheduling, deciding how long and how often to irrigate. Smart irrigation technologies make use of local weather stations that measure air temperature, humidity, wind speed, and rainfall, soil probes that measure soil moisture depth, temperature, and salinity, and plant moisture sensing devices that measure the water pressure in plant cells. Increasingly, software paired with these technologies allows growers to easily access real-time data on field conditions, receive alerts through email and text messages, and automate or control their irrigation systems remotely.
All right, so we got some tech, we talked policy, we talked infrastructure. Last one is farming techniques. So farmers could explore combinations of plants, like crop diversity, so that they can grow more plants with the same amount of water. One recent study found that cowpea grown with millet can produce the same millet yield as millet alone. That means farmers could get additional protein-rich cowpea with the same quantity of water. Cowpea, Jay.
Right. I think it's worth noting.
PEA.
For the definers. Cowpea. It's one word, COWPEA. We're not talking about cattle urine in this situation.
But, Jay, have you heard of cowpea before? I have not.
No, I haven't.
It sounds like something you should be eating after your workout. It's apparently protein-rich.
Eating after your workout, not drinking on the side.
Yeah. Okay. So another technique that could be used to save water is deficit irrigation, which is the practice of watering plants less frequently, but in a targeted manner. It can force the plant to dig their root systems deeper and be less dependent on watering.
Farmers can also plant cover crops like grasses or legumes in between growing the cash crops. Cover crops improve the health of soils by keeping the soil covered, cooling the surface, and reducing water lost to evaporation. Healthy soils mean more water is in the soil for plants to access, meaning less watering is needed. Certainly, one way to have healthy soils is no-till agriculture, which is where the soil is not plowed. And this practice can help conserve water in a variety of ways. One way is soil pores serve as the conduits for water, and with no-till, there is less clogging of the pores, which means water can flow even more freely.
We don't want to clog the pores in the soil. We don't want to clog the pores on our skin.
Let it be known, far and wide.
Face wash, baby. All right, so we talked about cover crops and other forms of regenerative agriculture in our episode number 23 on agroecology. We're calling back some episodes, Jay.
Yeah,
I love when
these
we do
are
that.
this is from a good little while ago. These are some oldies and goodies.
And for those who like to consume their information maybe more movie documentary style than are we middle-aged, Jay?
God.
No.
Anna would say yes. I would say no.
Why is Anna calling us middle-aged?
Well, because she is clinging on to her 20s at this particular moment in time.
Oh, she's making fun of us.
Yes,
I don't like that.
That's it.
All right. So, movie documentary style. Consider checking out on Netflix the documentary Kiss the Ground, which has science experts and celebrity activists unpack the ways in which the Earth's soil may be the key to combating climate change and preserving the planet. Celebrity activists. I like that. Yeah. All right. So, Jay, let's talk about our celebrity guest, Ashwin Madgavkar, founder of Ceres Imaging.
Right. So, Ashwin got his undergraduate degree in electrical engineering from the University of Texas at Austin, and he got his MBA from Stanford. While a graduate student at Stanford, Ashwin was inspired to launch Ceres Imaging by the plight of California growers navigating a severe drought and by emerging technology in spectral imagery. Ceres Imaging now has its headquarters in Oakland, California, and it serves growers in Australia, South America, and the United States. It delivers precision agriculture solutions that help growers detect acute issues, track and measure progress, and improve farm performance.
All right, this is good. We're on solutions, Jay. This is positive.
Love it, Scott. Let's move on over and chat with Ashwin ourselves. All right, Definers, welcome to the interview portion of this episode focusing on water and agriculture. We are thrilled today to be speaking with Ashwin Madgavkar, the founder of Ceres Imaging. So, Ashwin, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Los Angeles today.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
Ashwin, we are really excited to dive into this topic with you, but why don't you get us started with the history of Ceres Imaging? So, we read that you launched Ceres Imaging as a graduate student in 2014, inspired by emerging technology in spectral imagery and galvanized by the plight of California growers navigating a severe drought that, of course, still remains very relevant. Can you tell us more about the inception of Ceres Imaging and what it was like getting it off the ground?
Certainly, and yeah, that's well said. Ceres came from a couple different inspirations, as you pointed out, and just for the listeners' benefit, what we do is help farmers optimize water, fertilizer, and other critical inputs through applying an imagery-based analytics and intelligence product. So we'll fly above farms. We have a sensor looking at different wavelengths of light. We'll analyze that using a computer vision and machine learning pipeline, and then show farmers which plants may be overwatered or underwatered, where they might have a nutrient deficiency, where an early stage pest infestation is turning up. So it's a lot of actionable insights that help farmers increase their yields, growing more with less, and so doing it more efficiently and more sustainably at the same time. And so I started it in 2014, as you noted. Originally an engineer by training, studied electrical engineering, growing up in Texas. And in Texas, my parents worked in the energy industry. So I sort of grew up in energy, and I've always been really interested in energy and sustainability. It was through energy that I actually got into agriculture by working in bioenergy. And I'd spent some time working in Latin America, in Brazil, where a lot of sugarcane is grown for ethanol production. And we're working with a large sugarcane ethanol producer down there, where I was able to see very large scale agricultural operations. And it was a really amazing project, amazing experience, and fun to see how ag is done on the largest scales, because Brazil, many of the farms are true mega farms, larger than many that are in the US. And you just see seas and seas of sugarcane. And I was struck by these, farms that are the size of major cities, like, the size of San Francisco. And when people were making decisions about how much chemicals, fertilizers, and other inputs to put on, they really lacked data. They were just taking a couple soil samples across a massive area. And so it wasn't very precise. And that led to a lot of inefficiency. The excessive chemicals that ended up being applied were costly and not good for the farmer's bottom line. And then also would make their way into the groundwater or have other negative environmental impacts. And so later, when I was in grad school, I had gone to Stanford for an MBA, and with an engineering undergrad, I was taking a lot of courses in the Earth Sciences School, also with a sustainability interest. And in the Earth Sciences School is where I'd seen this technology of spectral imaging, and I was really struck by the potential to use spectral imagery, looking at different wavelengths to understand plant health. And I thought, hey, if we could take this concept and technology and productize it, make it cheaper, faster, and more targeted towards different management decisions, then that would be really powerful for the ag industry based on what I'd seen in Latin America. And it would be a great sustainability positive impact as well. So that's what sort of inspired me to launch the company back then.
So it sounds like it was good that you were in Brazil, because then you were exposed to seeing farmers' lack of data. And then at Stanford, it was good you were there because you were taking a class that talked about spectral imagery. I just want to make sure I understand what that is. So spectral imagery, you're talking about images where you can see the different wavelengths. Is that what I picked up?
Yeah, exactly. So what we're doing is measuring different wavelengths alike. So not just the visible wavelengths like what the eye sees, but wavelengths beyond in the near infrared, the thermal infrared, and very precise wavelengths, specific wavelengths within the visible spectrum too. So by looking at a precise green or a precise near infrared wavelength and comparing the differences and doing some analytics on that, we're able to estimate how hydrated is the plant, or what's the chlorophyll content of an acre, for instance.
How does knowing the wavelength of light tell you how hydrated it is?
So plants, interestingly, behave similar to humans in that when they're sick or malaffected, they'll heat up, and plants will transpire to cool themselves down. And so the cooler the plant, the better watered it is, because it's essentially transpirating, and in releasing that water vapor will be cooler. So by looking at the thermal infrared wavelengths, basically a heat signature, in looking at very precise differentials and combining that with a whole set of other analytics, we can measure subtle differences in plant transpiration, and then estimate what the hydration is as a result of that.
So if it's transpiring water, is it overwatered then?
If it is transpiring well, that means it is well hydrated.
It's well hydrated,
appropriately, okay. Yes. And if it is exceptionally hot, it might mean that one of several things. First, that the plant is lacking water, and can't, in a drought scenario, that's something we see all the time in California. It could be that it's overwatered, actually, because when the plant has too much water, the roots will start to drown, and then the plant will heat up very rapidly, as it can't transpire then as well. And then lastly, it could be a pest or disease that's causing it to heat, because that's preventing the plant from transpirating.
Ashwin, when can I expect to have a plane fly over me and then get a text via ping and say, "Hey, you're dehydrated, by the
way"? You're next on the list after the plane flies over my wilting plant garden on our patio.
Oh my goodness, your own plants. They need to be watered more. So you talk about the flying over. Are we talking about just a drone?
So we use a variety of different sources, and actually, like, the main one is manned aircraft, like a simple Cessna 172. We started as a drone company, but quickly realized that drones were difficult to scale. You have to, build or buy the drone. You have to train a drone operator, and then you can only fly at a few hundred feet, and a battery is limiting the lifetime of the flight to 30 to 60 minutes, and then. So you can only cover maybe 50, 100, 200 acres in that individual flight. Whereas with a Cessna, you can fly at thousands or tens of thousands of feet for hours. And so in a single plane flight, we can cover 10,000 acres, whereas in a drone flight, we can cover maybe 100 acres. So it's really orders of magnitude difference. And there's actually, a host of Cessnas that have already been built and deployed. It's the world's most commonly used aircraft.
And so, Ashwin, I think your website does a fantastic job of outlining what Ceres Imaging focuses on, and especially laying out the visuals of what your planes come back with, so you can perhaps map out visually, as you've described, which areas of a farm perhaps might need more water versus less water. But I'm curious, because we're focusing so much on water in this conversation. It sounds like it was one of the main principles of Ceres that you started with the company. Were there any other ways you came to more deeply understand the water-related issues that farmers were facing, in addition to the aerial footage that you would get?
Yeah, well, in getting the company off the ground, we spent a lot of time in the field with customers. So driving, throughout the Central Valley, California, and other agricultural regions to talk about them on what were the most biggest pain points that they felt, and where did they see the future of the industry. And the water was the most common refrain of what people were worried about. And if you'll recall, in 2014, California was in a very severe drought back then. And it is now too. It's sadly a recurring issue.
Yeah.
But by really immersing ourselves with the customers and understanding their operations, understanding how water is applied and the infrastructure to deliver water, as well as the on-farm irrigation infrastructure and equipment, and what leads to overwatering or underwatering, how farmers make decisions. By understanding all that, we can craft the right sort of analytical solution for the farmer. And by delivering those insights in a cost-effective way, we've been able to scale to working with many of the state's largest farmers, and we're probably on more than 20% of the state's high-value crop acres, like orchards and vineyards, and vegetables, for instance.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, totally. And especially for for a startup that's introducing a radically new technology, we're quite proud of it and see every day the impacts of identifying different water issues and helping the farmers to improve their water use efficiency, that crop per drop.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, like you say, you already have 20% of the high cash crops, you said, in California, right? But like, do you find, though, when you talk to farmers that there is some barriers where they're maybe a little skeptical of you, or they feel like, I've been doing this for a long time, I'm good? Or do you find, no, that you don't really run into any issues once you explain to them how it works?
Oh, certainly. There's so many learnings over the years of the company. With farmers, we found it takes a variety of steps to build some of the trust and get over that initial skepticism that you're talking about, particularly for digital technologies, because farms have a lot of very sophisticated equipment and machinery, as well as biological and chemical technologies on their farm. But it's the whole ag industry in general is very early in the stages of digital adoption, if you will. So the way we approached it is, in a couple different steps. So first is we worked with different university partners like the UC Cooperative Extension or UC Davis to essentially pilot the technology, work on these field trials, which the researchers are collecting a lot of ground data, and then provide them our aerial data, and essentially build a library that shows how well our data correlates to the ground truth data.
And it's smart to work with a university, I would think, to have a trusted partner on there.
Exactly. Yes, because the farmers in the industry, know and trust some of these scientists and researchers. And by going through a rigorous scientific process, we're able to prove that what we're doing is accurate and actionable. And then the second step after that is every farmer, once we pitch them on our value proposition and the impact that we can make, is to do a trial with the farmer on their own farm. Nothing makes believing like seeing it work in practice. And so what we typically do is fly above a few of the farmers' properties and say, like, hey, here's 4 irrigation issues that we noticed, and here's the potential value of these if you're able to fix them.
Oh, it's probably tough to say no to uniquely, that's their farm. It's not, hey, on average, we have this impact. It's like, no, we looked at your farm. Here's the thing you can do, and here's the impact. I got to think that that's pretty good.
Yeah, for sure.
And that impact, Ashwin, I think is really awesome, because it's going above and beyond like, well, hey, here's your farm and here's some observations. But for you guys to be able to actually come back with some quantifiable, data for them that impacts directly their bottom line, I think is extremely compelling.
Exactly. When they look at the data and can go to the area of their field and fix the valve or change the drip tape and see the issue, it's kind of mind blowing, because they're like, whoa, I've been farming this field for years and I've never knew that we had a rock in the main line.
That's simple. Just like move a rock.
Yeah, sometimes really.
Wow.
But it's a million different things that can go wrong, a lot of different types of issues that could happen. But that's a story I remember from a particular farmer a few years ago. And they always thought that this area of a farm had a bad soil type, which was leading to poor hydration of the plants. And we were able to actually show that it was not the soil, but the infrastructure that had a rock kind of buried deep within one of the lines that was preventing enough water from actually getting out.
Jay, in the intro, we didn't have check the rocks.
Right. Step 1 when assessing your crop health is move any stray rocks. Ashwin, I am curious along that line. What are some of the other most common observations you make from farms with respect to their water? I mean, is it? That's a great example. But are there any standouts that you usually, or I guess, are not surprised to see when you do these aerial scans?
Yeah, for sure. So what we'll typically do is start with a farmer on low-hanging fruit, and typically that's fixing their irrigation systems. There can be a variety of irrigation systems. There's drip, there's sprinkler, pivot, flood irrigation. So it depends on the type of irrigation that we're talking about. But if we take a drip field as an example, which is a very efficient irrigation system, you essentially have one or two lines of drip tape that run through every plant in the field, in the farm. So you have miles and miles of like plumbing and a fairly complex infrastructure. And the minute you put that drip tape in there, it starts to degrade because coyotes will come and chew up the drip line. Sand will blow and get into some emitters, and on and on and on. It'll degrade over time. And so what'll happen is the drip tape won't uniformly or evenly put out the water that it's supposed to. And in addition to that, the soil types that it's trying to irrigate there's a lot of variability in differentiation. And so what'll happen is many plants will get overwatered or underwatered as a result of that. And so by looking and measuring water stress at a plant level, we can give the farmer extremely actionable insights to correct a lot of those problems. And so, any farm that we image, we can see up to dozens literally of issues where they can, make these small scale fine-tuned adjustments, right? Like maybe on a dual line drip tape, one of the lines is plugged, needs to be fixed. Maybe there's a valve that controls a quarter of the field that is partially broken or plugged that needs to be replaced. So there's a variety of these infrastructure issues that we can do. And then also the farmer can see like, how well am I watering my farm? Like what parts are consistently overwatered or underwatered? And then do I want to adjust my irrigation strategy? Am I overwatering this farm and I should divert the water to another property? Is there a part of the field, like a particularly bad part of the field that I want to focus on? So we can go beyond the infrastructure issues and really help them on true management decisions, particularly after capturing a time series of data. And for some farms that we've been working with for a long time, we have years of data, so we can really get on top of any week-to-week or month-to-month changes that are happening in the property and help the management team dial in and fine-tune and really get the most out of that farm.
No, that makes sense. And I mean, I got to think as a farmer, you're like, wow, individual plant data, it's got to be mind-blowing for some. I wonder, though, like how you're communicating this to them. Is there like a dashboard? I think we read that there's notifications, like they're getting messages on their phone. Like, how does it work in terms of giving them the information so that they can then go act on it?
Farmers are very busy. They have a lot going on in any given day, and there's always fires to put out. And so to your point, like the plant level data is wonderful, but you have to be very careful not to make it overwhelming. It really needs to be simplified. And so
you don't want them turning off those push notifications from you.
Yeah, precisely. So we'll deliver the data on web and mobile app. And, the visual nature makes it very intuitive and easy to interpret. And we'll do some things that I had, seen and been very effective in my consulting days, where it's, when we're taking a new technology and trying to introduce it to an organization, we don't want to just give the data to the farmer and say good luck. It's important to like hold some trainings or imagery interpretation reviews or support for them in order to make sure that they're able to implement the data.
Excellent. So Ashwin, this is all extremely fascinating stuff. You've been able to really take this business from your grad school days and turned it into what we've been discussing, an extremely compelling tool for all sorts of users, whether it's the farmer on the farm or someone that's helping manage the farm from perhaps behind a desk. I also want to layer onto that you guys won the 2020 Zayed Sustainability Prize not too long ago. So first of all, congratulations. That's a huge honor. Mm-hmm. And second, I'm curious how winning the prize has helped Ceres Imaging to scale up.
Yeah, thank you. It was a wonderful experience and a great honor. To your point, the prize has been really helpful for us to advance our global vision and the impact that we can have. When I started the company, a lot of the inspiration was from Latin America, but we wanted to start in California and really focus on high value crops and then use the learnings from that to go more broadly and work with more crops and more regions over time, because I believe it's something that, every farmer can use to optimize their agricultural decision making. Where the prize has been really impactful is by one, giving us a truly global network and platform to build partnerships and facilitate international discussions and expansions. And then also a little capital from the prize money to accelerate that transition. And so beyond California, we're all over the US. We're also in Australia. We've expanded recently into Latin America, into Mexico, Chile, and Peru. And we're just entering Europe into Spain and Portugal right now. And so it's one step at a time, but the prize has been really helpful to us to advance that global impact and vision, as well as it's an honor and an inspiration for our team in that we are all motivated highly by the sustainability and the impact that we can have. And the prize is extremely well aligned with that.
Well, it's a good thing with all that global growth, you didn't just have a baby or anything, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And definers for reference, Ashwin did share that he's a new father before the interview started. So Ashwin, congratulations again.
Thank you.
Yes. And I'm curious. So the prize, how do they facilitate connecting with, I guess, the other winners or international? Like, how do they do that? What kind of support is there on that front?
Well, there is a lot of networking at different events that the prize holds, different opportunities. And for instance, I was in Ceres was recently invited to participate with the prize at the UN COP27 conference in Egypt.
Nice.
And that was a wonderful experience for us to observe the high level discussions and policy and negotiations that are happening at the conference, and really connect with both public and private sector potential partners in the sustainability, water, and agricultural spaces. And so that was an example of how the prize can really help us to connect the dots globally.
All right. So Ashwin, we've been talking at great depth about all of the phenomenal solutions that Ceres Imaging offers. I'm wondering if you just have any particular case studies from your experience over the years that perhaps stand out as your favorite.
Yeah, definitely. We've worked with, thousands of farmers and made quite a lot of impact. So it's hard to pick a favorite after all that. But one particularly stands out in my mind from the early days of the company. And we had just signed up a couple big customers out in Australia. And I had flown down there to get our operations set up, and our team went from out of the country to operational in Australia in less than 2 weeks. It was really impressive. But what I'm remembering is we had started the project with kind of the upper management of this company, and I met these skeptical and mid-level farm managers and agronomists that were the ones, more out in the field and doing the work and taking a lot of pride in what they do. And by showing them the data that we collected and identifying like very specific issues like a broken valve or a leaky drip line or whatnot, we would walk out together in this remote part of Australia, close to the Australian outback, and go in this maze of trees and actually find like this needle in the haystack where there is water gushing from the ground and over irrigating a bunch of trees in the middle, but that water wasn't going to the trees that needed it. And seeing the eureka moment on the farmers' faces was really rewarding, as well as the impact, because by helping even just like a few acres, that's a tens of thousands of dollars of impact. And by showing them how the tool could be a useful thing for them to do their jobs, which they take a lot of pride in, better and be more efficient about it, was really rewarding, versus them seeing it as just another task they had to do, or big brother looking over their shoulder or something like that. And so that was, helped us to really build a great partnership, and then also see them and learn from them about how they make those management decisions, how they find those issues, and like what value are they getting from the data that helps us, take those learnings and productize them and make them more scalable to other types of farmers as well.
And Ashwin, do you know, like, by working in Australia or elsewhere, we did X, or we advised that they do X, they did X, and then the water reduction, the water efficiency improvement or the water use reduction was Y?
Yeah, definitely. So with this, large farm, we held a series of different meetings and workshops across their properties, and ultimately saved about 5 upwards of 10% of the water that we realized was not being utilized efficiently, and we're able to improve that efficiency. And so that is literally like billions of gallons of water on this one individual property, and millions of dollars of impact that we're able to achieve in a very short period of time, by showing the farmer what are their biggest and easiest opportunities for impact.
Got it. I mean, it must have been a big farm to have that kind of impact with a 5 to 10% savings, which might not sound like a lot, but relative to the farm size, it sounds like it was a big deal.
Okay, let's start turning our eye to the future here of Ceres Imaging. So, Ashwin, you already provided great examples of how, especially with help from the Zayed Sustainability Prize, you've been able to expand into Latin America most recently, and sounds like into Europe as well, which is extremely exciting. I'm curious, as our climates continued to get warmer and perhaps drier in a lot of the areas you're focusing in, what are the next steps forward for your company to help farmers maximize their water efficiency?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, like one thing that we're really excited about is the global potential of our solution, and the international expansions that we have underway. 2 is we are taking all the data that we're collecting and building a new set of metrics and dashboards around it to make the data more quantified, and mine essentially these large series of images that we'll collect over months and years, even on different farms, to extract the most important trends and things that may not be visible just within a single image, for instance.
You got to have a good dashboard.
Exactly.
So.
Precisely. And then the last piece that we're also excited about is taking what we've built for farmers and then tweaking that and making it useful for different institutions. So we're working with some large agribusinesses around sustainability goals, for instance, helping them map their supply chain and understand where they may be able to help their partner growers around water and weather inputs. And also with ag financial institutions, so lenders and insurers, making the data useful for them too. And the financial services sector, we believe is another important source of growth for us in ways that we can really optimize the whole ag ecosystem, because if we can help the farmer, the crop input company, the financial institutions, and others in the space, we can truly make a more efficient realization of the agricultural production system.
This sounds really smart in terms of using your historic data, because there can't be a startup that can just come on the scene and outdo you there, right? Because you've been working for years and they haven't. So that makes sense. And then finding different customers for your data. Totally love the idea of going to the investors. Makes sense. So we wish you the best, of course. And this brings us now to our final question. So we ask this every episode. And so let's pretend, Ashwin, that we're all at a party. And it's at a farm, because farms are idyllic places. You can have a nice party there. And we have Cessna rides for people to go and have fun flying around. But we're eating, we're drinking while we're waiting for our turn to go on the Cessna. And we ask, or someone asks us, they say, hey, we want to know about water and agriculture. What is one stat that we could throw out at this party to cause this person to be totally astonished?
Okay, I think I got something. One thing that came up at the COP27 a conference was the impact of climate change, in particular droughts. And about 43% of U.S. states are currently experiencing droughts, and 2.3 billion people globally are experiencing drought-related water stress right now. And so it's something that's more important now than ever to use the water that we have more efficiently, and highlights the necessity to invest in sustainability.
Thank you for that.
Excellent.
It just hits you with the scale of the problem. Like you said, 5 to 10% when you're talking about that many drought-stricken areas, that so many acres of farms that could be impacted. It's a big deal. So thank you for starting this, and keep on going. And yeah, it'll be exciting to see your future as well as just innovations in this in general.
Well, yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation and appreciate your thoughtful questions.
Ashwin, thanks so much, and take care.
Thanks.
All right, Scott, we've been talking a lot about water this episode. Simultaneously, I have been drinking a glass of water here on the side that has just run out. So we're going to use that as a cue to go ahead and just wrap this episode up, along with all the water that used to be in my glass.
Mm-hmm. Did you have precision drippage into your mouth? Or did you flood irrigate your mouth?
I was definitely flood irrigating, but maybe...
It's as the Mesopotamians did, Jay. So.
Right. I'm envisioning myself with like a little rubber tube that's just dripping drops into my mouth. But
yeah, I was the baster from Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Oh man. All right. Well, with that, folks, we'd like to wrap up with some thank yous. As always, thank you to Keaton Butler for making this audio sound so good. Thank you to Potions and Square Peg Round Hole for the music we use in this episode. And also thank you to our sponsor, the Zayed Sustainability Prize. Again, for more info on the prize, go to ZayedSustainabilityPrize.com.
All right, Jay. And yes to all those thank yous, but also we're lacking on the reviews, Jay. I have to say, I hope some definers, if you're still listening, we could use some more. We didn't have a new one to read. So it's, again, likely if you go on and review us, it really helps. It gets people to discover the show. We'll read it. And because we don't have a new one, Jay, we just went back into the review archives, and I found one from April 2016.
Ooh, boy.
Okay. From Music Fan Cram, who I assume is still listening. And here is the title, Educational and Fun at the Same Time. Here's the review. Promising new podcast for anyone interested in sustainability. One of my all-time favorite books is Natural Capitalism. Like that book, this podcast approaches the giant topic of sustainability one small piece at a time. Each episode explores a different aspect of sustainability, like the exciting growth of electric bikes, what we should do about HFCs, and why the bees are dying. The hosts take a fun, conversational tone to work through these important topics, both with and without guests. If you care about the environment and want to stay up to date on the topic of sustainability, this is a great podcast. Music Fan Cram, he got us, or she got us, or whatever, from the beginning.
Scott, this is crazy. As you're reading this, I'm going back to figure out. This is early. This is April 30th, okay? We released our first 3 episodes simultaneously on April 28th of that year. So Music Fan Cram snuck this in there fast. And maybe this person thought they weren't going to have it read, but boom, here it is. And for all you listeners out there that haven't yet, do it. We'll read it.
And Jay, they just go to Apple Podcasts, right? They can do it on their phone. type a quick little review, and then it's done.
That's right. And Scott, I'm going to direct my focus now to you, the listener, the definer who's listening via Spotify. And you're like, oh, I can't leave comments and reviews on Spotify. Well, sorry, tough. Could you please go to Apple Podcasts and leave one for us? It would be greatly appreciated.
All right. And with that humble request, I think that about does it, Jay. You all stay sustainable out there. I'm Scott Breen.
And I'm Jay Siegel. We will see you next time.